Every day, over 7 million journeys in London are paid for using the Oyster card. It's cheaper than using regular tickets, it's convenient, and the money placed on it is securely stored. Or at least it was until very recently. Over the last couple of months, hackers and university researchers like these have found huge flaws with the way the minute chips inside smart cards like this one communicate. The information transmitted between the chips and the readers in underground stations is encrypted. So if you wanted to tamper with a chip, say for example to clone it, you'd need to know a secret key. But to even find out what that secret key was, you'd first need to know the algorithm or code protecting the key itself from being discovered. Remarkably, and by carrying out painstaking work, some young hackers I've met were able to deduce what that algorithm was, or indeed, what the lock for the key looked like. Once that was done, the key could be retrieved, and it now appears that cards using that particular chip, including the Oyster card, can be copied wirelessly in public places without your knowing. And that includes copying your name, your address, your date of birth, and however much money you just topped it up with.
If you can counterfeit, if you can easily copy the instrument, the smart card instrument, that's a huge problem. And no matter what you do in the rest of the system, that's a major vulnerability.
The chip in question, the Mifare Classic, is king of the so-called smart card chips. From supply chain management to controlling access to football grounds, buildings or train rides, there are over 1 billion of them in circulation around the world. The chip communicates via a system known as RFID, or radio frequency identification, which has been in use since the 1960s. You put one of these tiny chips inside a shipping container, a pet or a travel card, and a reading device can communicate with the chip to extract its unique identification number. Hence their deployment by Transport for London, who used the chip in that most ubiquitous of smart cards, the Oyster card. Bicycles are everywhere in the Netherlands, but it's public transport that has been headline news lately as fears surrounding data protection and fraud have grown. The Dutch have kicked up a fuss about the launch of a costly new public transport payment system. The OV Chipkaart uses cards based on the Mifare Classic chip, but due to the work of hackers cloning that chip, critics in Holland claim the card is insecure.
It turned out to be a very big deal because the card is pretty much cracked now, and we are waiting for the first demonstration, and then that game is over and they have to replace the cards.
The Dutch media's fascination all kicked off last summer when University of Amsterdam students found that single journey tickets could be cloned. The tickets were using the Mifare Classic's less sophisticated brother, the Ultralight, which was also being introduced as part of the scheme to phase out the older style tickets.
We thought it was very unlikely that we would find anything, but yeah, we just wanted to make sure that there was no flaw, and we checked everything, and well, it turned out there was a flaw.
According to the students, the card had no security whatsoever, and the operators had put it into use without implementing their own system-level security to detect fraud. Using laptops and readily available hardware, the students were able to convince the readers in the station that they were being presented with unused tickets. Soon enough, however, the problem was fixed. But the bigger coming issue was the discovery that the Mifare Classic, used in the Oyster-style OV Chipkaart, could also be tampered with. The problem for the Mifare Classic chip is that last December, German researchers gave a presentation claiming that they had cracked the algorithm protecting the chip from fraudulent use. But it was a team from Holland who held the Dutch media's imagination when they proved it wasn't transportation alone that was set to face repercussions. The Dutch team released footage showing how to make a copy of an access control card for a supposedly secure building. As the card used the same chip as the OV Chipkaart, the issue became heated politically, being debated in Parliament and spelling trouble for TransLink as well as the Transport Minister.
So I think the media realizes something is wrong badly, and this application is in use by everybody. It's a huge project. This is a project where each and every citizen for a bus, a train, a subway will use the card, so it will be widely in use. And now apparently 1.5 billion euros has been spent and the system is not yet in use and it's broken already. So from a political stance it's very sensitive.
TransLink hired an organisation to assess the risks involved in using the chip for transportation payments. The report recommended that TransLink have a migration strategy in place within 2 years, while the Dutch Minister for the Interior warned other governments around the world of the risks of using the Mifare Classic in a range of applications, even calling some of the researchers to Parliament. While Brenno and I discussed the issue in front of TransLink headquarters, we were finally invited inside by the company. They were adamant they wouldn't speak to me on camera, but while they showed off their new gadgets and defended their case, they made some fascinating claims regarding the stark similarities between their system and TfL's. And while they've sat and watched the OV Chipkaart's glaring inadequacies highlighted by the media, TfL and its equally at risk Oyster Card has gone unscathed.
Yes. Well, what they've just told us is that they've been amazed by the tremendous amount of attention from mainstream media and technical media in the Netherlands. And when they look at the UK or the US, there isn't that much attention for the same issues. And what is going wrong in the Netherlands will go wrong in the UK or the US as well. So there isn't that much difference.
The next day I went to meet the team who showed how to clone the access card. After the German group had discovered the algorithm protecting the communication between the chips and the readers, the Dutch team made clear the huge implications of relying upon the Mifare Classic when they used that cracked algorithm to retrieve the chip's keys. At the Radboud University in Nijmegen, Rolf Adult explained how his digital security teams swiped card details, reproduced them, and fooled card readers into thinking they were reading genuine cards.
You can say that if you have retrieved the keys from the which are used in the card, you can just read out the whole memory of the card within a few milliseconds. So that would mean you can walk by someone and use your own device to read out a card which is in someone's pocket. When you have collected the data, you can represent that again to, well, the gate or the access control device, which is trying to read out the original card and the original data. But because you're faking the original card and you copied the original data, you can check into a system without actually having the original card.
After Roll explained the ease with which card details could be swiped from a random passerby, his colleague Gerhard showed me the method by which the cloning work was done. First, a device to obtain the keys from the reader on the door is connected to a computer. It can't open the door at first, but while communicating, important data used to retrieve the keys is collected. With the algorithm known, a computer is able to use the retrieved information to reveal the keys. With the security now totally bypassed, a working card has its information extracted, and a new card has the information written onto it. Your Mifare Classic protected secure area is no longer so secure. After assessing the impact the hacking had had in Holland, I headed to Germany. Here in Cologne, the Chaos Computer Club's Easter get-together was taking place, where the wintry weather was making a final Easter push. At this gathering of self-confessed nerds from across Europe, digital security and data retention were at the front of everyone's minds inside this former chocolate factory. The group who first unlocked the chip's secret algorithm, at least publicly, were the star speakers. Carsten Knoll explained how, along with colleagues Henrik Plutz and Starbug, they dismantled the 1/4 millimeter wide chip step by step before photographing each layer through a microscope and deciphering the algorithm.
Nobody knew what the door looked like, how the lock worked in the door. And without this piece of knowledge, you couldn't manufacture all the different keys that could potentially open the door. Hence, nobody could even start going through this process. And now what my project found is exactly these internals of the door, what the lock looks like, how the lock works.
Once they'd found out what that secret algorithm was, the threat to public transportation payment systems became clear.
The largest systems in which these cards are used are transport companies. So they're breaking a system and what the Dutch government in a report found developing a business model to say sell fake tickets is a serious threat clearly for transport companies, since there's so many potential buyers of pirated tickets. We're talking about millions of people in London, so even if only a few thousand of those were willing to pay you money for pirated tickets, this would still make for good business. Which really amounts to some criminal walking through the subway, having a reading device potentially hidden in a backpack or something, and scanning all the cards in his vicinity. So collecting a large number of these potential cards to copy isn't a big problem. And once that phase is done, you now can create copies of every single one of these cards.
Visiting the Smartcard group, I asked David Everett whether the Mifare Classic was still fit for use in the Oyster card.
Fit for purpose says, well, okay, what's my risk model? And again, my classic, if I got a school with 1,000 students, my risk is pretty low in being attacked. If I've got a huge system in London, the Oyster card V1 is a huge mass transit system, or the Octopus card in Hong Kong, that's worth attacking.
TfL, as well as Transys, the company used to implement the Oyster card in London, both repeatedly refused my requests for an interview, but TfL's spokesperson did tell me that despite the advice of hackers, researchers, independent analysts and the Dutch government, they were confident that their extra levels of security were sufficient. Because the information taken in by readers synchronizes with the so-called backroom throughout the day, fraudulent cards can, so the argument goes, be detected. But detection is a long way from prevention. And anyway, there are plenty of doubts that such a system would be effective against criminal gangs intent on mass-producing fraudulent cards.
You can try and identify, if you like, counterfeit or fraudulent objects in your system. But if you can imagine, that's pretty hard to do actually when in a mass transit system where you've got cards being used, many cards being used per second across the system. The same with a financial card system. By the time you've actually worked out or somebody's reported a card, or you've got a card in your system that you know is a counterfeit object, trying to do something about that is actually very, very difficult, particularly if it's done on a large scale.
I'm afraid that there isn't enough data to work on. Everybody pretty much enters the subway in the same way, and that there aren't really habits to be extracted. So the only way in which you could find a copy of a legitimate card would be if both of these cards are used at the same time.
And you could then, of course, shut it down. But one of your problems is which one do you shut down, because one of them is probably genuine.
So it looks like TfL would struggle to combat fake cards. While they'd be missing out on revenue, however, it's the public who are also at risk. Naturally, customers wouldn't react lightly to having their accounts shut down due to a duplicate card doing the rounds. But there is another big problem with this regarding ID theft. Each card has a unique ID number which sits with the individual's details, with the police and MI5 now requesting travel records from TfL for use as evidence. You want to make sure the owner of a card really is who you think it is. Private investigators already target the travel records of unfaithful spouses, but with MI5 mapping out the use of travel records as evidence, the risks surrounding someone else escaping with your identity are even greater. Of course, there's doubt within the industry that attacks are even likely. David Birch is director of a leading digital payments consultancy and says that the issue has been blown out of proportion.
You're dealing with real security, and you're dealing with kind of headline/perceived security. So on the real security side, no one would argue for one moment that you shouldn't have proper security, that you can just rely on the card security and that's good enough. No one would make that argument. Systems like payments, there are so many levels of security that there'd be no need to panic if card security was compromised. And I think that's the situation you're seeing in public transport with the Mifare.
And TfL certainly aren't panicking, at least publicly. But NXP, the Dutch firm that makes the Mifare Classic, addressed the concerns by announcing the launch of a new chip, the Mifare Plus, just weeks after news of the hack broke. Although my requests for an interview were again refused, The timing of the launch and the fact that the new chip features a 128-bit key, up from 48-bit, is undoubtedly an acknowledgement that the affordable Mifare Classic is no longer fit for purpose in many applications. There could well be pressure within certain organisations to stick heads in the sand due to the sheer cost of migrating to another card, but launching or even expanding Mifare Classic-based schemes beyond their current reach does seem to be unwise at the very least.
If you are going to use mass transit cards also for, say, rail, so in this country people are looking at using these cards for rail, and if you consider an annual first-class ticket, that's a very valuable card. That's worth attacking.
Despite these concerns, a spokesperson at the Association of Train Operating Companies told me that although it was a sensitive issue, they are absolutely pushing ahead with the rollout of the Oyster card to above-ground services in the London area. The spokesperson also said that TfL like to make political things out of it, an interesting admission in light of a 2006 document which lists concerns about fraud as one major reason train operating companies gave for not wanting to implement the Oyster card. Whether common sense prevails on the issue of introducing the Oyster to more overground services, we might have to wait and see. The public could also be at risk from the growing trend of contactless cash, which people are slowly warming to as smartcards become more trusted. While new Visa and Mastercard contactless cards use a different technology, launching a card based on the Mifare Classic now seems risky, as the incentives for fraud are obvious. To stop fraudulent use, if you detected it, you'd have to cancel both the original and copy card. Not exactly a brave new world of convenience. But someone is going ahead with the launch of Mifare-based contactless cash. It's called the Squid Card, and it's being trialled in Bolton. Squid Card refused to be interviewed, but as with TfL, stressed they had implemented additional multiple layers of security. I took the opinion of the experts on Squid's defence system. Again, Dave Birch feels things are being overstated.
You've got to distinguish between the Mifare card, which is the sort of base implementation, and the applications that are running on that card. You know, I would say, generally speaking, any of these systems is more secure than carrying cash. I mean, cash, you know, if you lose a £10 note, the Bank of England don't give you another one.
I asked Carsten Knoll whether the company might consider an alternative to the Mifare Classic.
Yeah, perhaps. And from what I understand, the Squid Card is only in the beta phase now. So there will perhaps be some change of mind and some decision to go to better encryption, which is readily available from even the same manufacturer, but also from others.
The threat to payments appears real, but it's perhaps where the Mifare Classic is used in access control that, at least from a security perspective, governments and companies have most to worry about. In March, it was widely reported that one European country, I'm told the Netherlands, dispatched guards to some government buildings using Mifare Classic in their entrance systems. According to David Everett, the algorithm becoming public had been feared for some time, even before the Classic was finally hacked.
The problem is proprietary cryptographic algorithms are not a good idea. It's well known you should not rely on secrecy of the algorithm. You should rely on secrecy of the key. And Philips at that time wanted to sell the Mifare into America, and they're very keen to get it into some of the major American government contracts. And it's fairly well known, believed, that the Americans refused to use a proprietary cryptographic algorithm.
At the end of the conference in Cologne, outside in some refreshing sunshine, I got Carsten's take on this.
I would imagine that the high incentives for criminal are in getting access to high secure areas. That would probably be achieved by finding an employee of a company, walking past that person, scanning the RFID tags without that person noticing, then walking up to the door of the company, again interacting with that door for a few seconds, and after that deriving the secret key and manufacturing an indistinguishable duplicate of this employee's badge to then have access into the building.
Researchers found this to be child's play, while the preemptive measures of the Dutch government showed that some parties are taking the threat very seriously. But all of this could have been prevented if a centuries-old law of cryptography dating from the Napoleonic Wars had been adhered to. Kirchhoff said that keeping your enemies out by hoping the workings of the system stay secret, what's known as security through obscurity, is risky. You should instead rely entirely on the secrecy of your key for security. Industry only needs to look at what happened with DVD security once the algorithm protecting them from being copied was discovered.
Kirchhoff's principle calls for systems to be designed in an open fashion, for algorithms to be public, or at least for systems to not rely on the obscurity of algorithms. And now, security through obscurity, what, for example, was attempted with the Mifare Classic, hardly ever works. Eventually, the details about the algorithm that are attempted to be kept secret will be discovered.
And so if the manufacturers of modern security systems are going to ignore this centuries-old rule, the importance of extra levels of security is multiplied. Instead of preventing fraud, which looks near impossible with the Mifare Classic, you have to make sure you can catch offenders once they're over the wall. TfL's Oyster Card, as well as that of other Mifare-based systems that rely on identifying a user, are compromised if you can only act once a breach of this wall has occurred. With the algorithm of the chip known, it's as if the password to your drawbridge is common knowledge. All you can do now is rely on your guards to catch the intruders once they've already made it inside. So while lessons can be learned from the Mifare Classic case, for certain applications the days are numbered for this most dominant of RFID chips. Transportation systems, including the Oyster Card, cash replacement schemes and supposedly secure buildings are now all potentially at risk. The best way to avoid fraud is undoubtedly to do what the Dutch are recommending, migrating to a safer but indeed costlier system. Whether British organisations listen to the advice of their European counterparts, however, is another matter entirely.